My boss refused to promote me because women aren't analytical enough, then took credit for my project. I didn't argue. I just smiled, nodded, and walked back to my desk like nothing happened. 3 months later, I handed in my resignation letter along with a business card for my new company. Now, 8 of his top analysts work for me, and I just landed the Morgan Stanley contract he's been chasing for years. It was supposed to be my day. After 3 years of 80-hour weeks, sleeping under my desk during quarterly reporting, and creating a revolutionary market analysis algorithm that saved JKL Financial over $13 million in my first year alone, I was finally up for the senior analyst position. I'd prepared for this moment, bought a new Banana Republic blazer I couldn't really afford, practiced my pitch in the mirror until 2 a.m., even got a blowout at Dry Bar instead of my usual messy bun. Martin called me into his corner office at exactly 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I checked my Apple Watch 3 times before walking in, my portfolio clutched against my chest like a shield. His office always smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement, with that ridiculous signed Yankees bat mounted on the wall and family photos that somehow looked staged, like he'd hired models instead of taking pictures with his actual wife and kids. "Elizabeth," he said, not looking up from his computer. "Have a seat." I sat smoothing my blazer, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. The promotion would mean an additional $35K a year, enough to finally move out of my shoebox apartment in Queens where the upstairs neighbor practiced tap dancing at midnight and the shower alternated between scalding and freezing with no warning. Martin finally looked up, leaning back in his ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "I've reviewed your performance," he said, tapping a folder on his desk that I recognized as the report on my algorithm. "The numbers are impressive. The board is pleased." I felt myself start to smile, hope rising like bubbles in champagne. "But," he continued, and just like that, the bubbles went flat. "We've decided to go in a different direction for the senior analyst position." The knot in my stomach dropped to my feet. "Different direction?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. Martin sighed, like explaining this to me was an inconvenience. "Look, Elizabeth, you're good with data entry and following established models. You've got attention to detail, but senior analyst requires big-picture thinking, strategic vision." He gestured vaguely with his hand. "The truth is, women just aren't naturally analytical enough for leadership positions in finance. It's not sexism, it's biology." I blinked, sure I'd misheard him. Did he just... in 2023? "But the algorithm," I said, pointing to the folder. "I developed that from scratch. It's revolutionized our approach to market volatility." Martin's smile was patronizing. "We all know James helped you with the complex parts." James. My coworker who had asked me to explain the algorithm to him 3 times and still didn't understand the fundamental concept. "Actually," I said carefully, "James wasn't involved in the development at all." Martin waved dismissively. "The point is, I've decided to promote Derek instead. He's got the killer instinct this position needs." Derek, who spent most meetings playing fantasy football on his phone and called me sweetheart in client presentations. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not at all." "Great talk," Martin said, already turning back to his computer. "Oh, and I'll be presenting your algorithm to the board as part of our Q2 strategy. I've made some tweaks to improve it." He hadn't. He couldn't even explain how it worked. I walked out of his office on autopilot, past the bullpen of analysts who'd soon be reporting to Derek instead of me, back to my desk with its wilting plant, and the emergency protein bars I kept in the bottom drawer for late nights. I sat down, opened my laptop, and made a decision that would change everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't file a complaint with HR. I just started planning. Updated. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To clarify, yes, I did file for patents before creating the algorithm, and no, I didn't sign an ironclad IP agreement when hired. The company's standard contract had surprising loopholes. Have you ever had a work idea stolen by a boss who later regretted it? Let me back up. 3 years ago, I joined JKL Financial fresh out of my MBA program at Columbia. Despite graduating at the top of my class, I was one of only 7 women hired that year out of a class of 42. From day one, the subtle and not-so-subtle messages were clear. I didn't quite belong. It started with small things. Being assigned to take notes in meetings despite having the same title as my male colleagues. Getting interrupted mid-presentation while the men spoke uninterrupted. Having my ideas dismissed in morning briefings only to be praised when repeated by Derek or James 20 minutes later. Once, I found a printout of a complex trading strategy I'd developed with "Is this even English?" scrawled across it in Martin's handwriting. Still, I persisted. I worked harder, stayed later, and delivered results that were impossible to ignore. By my second year, even Martin had to acknowledge my contributions, though he usually framed them as surprising. "Elizabeth actually made an interesting point," he'd say, eyebrows raised like he'd just witnessed a dog doing calculus. When I started developing the market analysis algorithm, I wasn't thinking about advancement or recognition. I was just trying to solve a problem that had been bothering me. Our risk assessment models were outdated, clunky, and missed important market signals during periods of volatility. Every time I brought this up in meetings, Martin would cut me off with, "That's just how it's done, Elizabeth," as if tradition was a suitable replacement for efficiency. So I worked on it after hours, coding late into the night at my kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and takeout containers. I studied complex systems theory, incorporated machine learning techniques, and tested the algorithm against historical market data going back 50 years. After 6 months, I had something revolutionary, an algorithm that could predict market fluctuations with 78% accuracy, nearly double our current system's capabilities. What Martin didn't know, what no one at JKL knew, was that before I presented the algorithm to the firm, I had quietly filed a provisional patent application under my own name for the core mechanics of the system. I wasn't planning to use it. It was just insurance, a small voice in the back of my mind warning me not to be naive. The firm's intellectual property agreement had a loophole. It covered work created using company resources or during company time. My algorithm was built on my personal laptop using open-source tools on nights and weekends. Technically, it was mine. When I finally presented it to the team, the response was underwhelming. Derek yawned openly. James asked if it could be used to predict sports outcomes. But Martin's eyes narrowed in that calculating way that meant he recognized value when he saw it. "Let's implement this on a trial basis," he said, which was the closest thing to enthusiasm I'd ever heard from him. Over the next 6 months, my algorithm saved the firm millions in avoided losses and identified profitable opportunities our previous models would have missed. Clients started specifically requesting analyses run through the new system. Success metrics across the board improved by double digits. And then, when the senior analyst position opened up, I thought, foolishly, it turns out, that merit might actually matter, that the numbers would speak for themselves. But as I sat at my desk after Martin's rejection, watching him through the glass walls of his office as he practiced presenting my work to the board, I realized that numbers only speak when people are willing to listen. And some people will never hear a woman's voice, no matter how loudly success shouts. That night, I didn't go home. I went to a coffee shop near Bryant Park, opened my laptop, and registered a domain name, Athena Analytics, the Greek goddess of wisdom seemed appropriate. By midnight, I had drafted a business plan. By 3 a.m., I'd emailed 3 former classmates who'd gone into venture capital. By the time I walked back into JKL the next morning, wearing the same clothes, running on caffeine, and determination, I had a preliminary funding commitment of $250,000. For the next 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was still Elizabeth, the overlooked analyst at JKL, nodding politely as Martin butchered explanations of my algorithm to impressed clients, watching Derek fumble through his new leadership role while constantly asking me how to perform basic functions. I documented everything. Every time my work was presented without credit, every meeting where Martin claimed to understand concepts he couldn't possibly grasp, every instance of Derek referring to female clients as gals or girls in internal communications. By night, I was the founder and CEO of Athena Analytics, building a company that would not only compete with JKL, but fundamentally change how financial analysis was done, and who got to do it. I rented a small office space in a WeWork on 23rd Street. I recruited Zoe, a brilliant data scientist I'd met at a Women in Finance mixer who'd been repeatedly passed over at Goldman Sachs. I brought on Raj, a former classmate who'd left Morgan Stanley after being told his accent was too distracting for client calls, despite his stellar track record. Slowly, quietly, I built a team of exceptional people who had been underestimated, overlooked, or outright dismissed by the old guard of Wall Street. The morning after Martin presented his algorithm to the board, earning himself a substantial bonus that he celebrated by buying a Porsche 911 Turbo he showed off in the parking garage, I finalized my formal patent application and submitted it to the USPTO. 1 week later, I handed in my resignation letter. Martin barely looked up from his desk. 2 weeks' notice is standard, he said dismissively. I placed my company card next to his keyboard. Athena Analytics, I said quietly. We officially launch next month. That got his attention. What is this? He asked, finally looking at me, confusion creasing his forehead. My company, I replied, specializing in advanced market analysis and risk assessment. He laughed, short and sharp. You're starting a company? With what expertise? What clients? I just smiled. You'll see. His expression darkened. You can't take our proprietary methods to a competitor. You signed an NDA. I'm not taking anything that isn't legally mine, I said, still smiling. Check the patent application for the algorithm you've been presenting as your own. USPTO application number 63B142,00857, filed under Elizabeth Chen 6 months ago. The color drained from his face. That's not possible. It is when you develop something on your own time, with your own resources, I replied. Which I documented, extensively, anticipating this exact conversation. Martin stood up so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. You think you can steal from this company? From me? His voice rose with each word. You're nothing without JKL backing you. No one will take you seriously. I didn't flinch. I guess we'll find out. My last 2 weeks at JKL were tense, to put it mildly. Martin alternated between ignoring me completely and calling me into his office to deliver thinly veiled threats. The legal department requested multiple meetings, which I attended with my own lawyer, a sharp Harvard grad specializing in intellectual property and gender discrimination cases. Derek suddenly needed my help with everything, realizing too late how much he'd relied on me without acknowledgement. I didn't gloat. I didn't burn bridges. I methodically transferred my projects, documented my processes, and trained my replacement, a recent grad named Tyler who looked perpetually terrified. I was professional to the end, even as whispers followed me through the halls and Martin's door slammed whenever I walked past. On my last day, as I packed up my desk, James stopped by. You're making a mistake, he said, leaning against the partition, like we were having a casual chat. Martin has connections throughout the industry. He could blackball you. I looked up at him. This man who'd taken credit for my work so many times I'd lost count. Thanks for your concern, I said, placing my dead plant in a cardboard box. He lowered his voice. Look, if you're doing this because of the promotion thing, I'm sure Martin would reconsider if you dropped this company nonsense. I closed my box and picked it up. Goodbye, James. As I walked toward the elevator, past the glass-walled conference rooms where I'd been talked over and ignored, past the corner office where I'd been told women weren't analytical enough to lead, past the cubicles, where I'd worked countless late nights without recognition, I felt light, free. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't trying to contort myself into someone who might finally be worthy of their approval. I was becoming someone who didn't need it anymore. Updated. Wow, this blew up overnight. To those asking about the patent, yes, it was approved 8 months later. Martin did try to challenge it, claiming it was developed using company resources. The documentation I kept, emails to myself, Git commits with timestamps, even coffee shop receipts from when I was coding, saved me. Anyone else keep excessive documentation because you don't trust your workplace? The first 6 months of running, Athena Analytics were the hardest and most exhilarating of my life. We operated out of that tiny WeWork office, living on coffee and determination. My small founding team expanded to include Taylor, a quantitative analyst who'd been fired from Deutsche Bank after reporting sexual harassment, and Miguel, a brilliant economist whose innovative approaches had been repeatedly shot down at his previous firm for being too risky. We weren't just building a company, we were creating the workplace we'd all been denied. One where ideas were evaluated on merit, not on who proposed them. Where diversity wasn't a PR checkbox but a fundamental strength. Where people could bring their whole selves to work without being told they didn't fit the mold. Our first client was a small regional bank that had been underserved by the major firms. They took a chance on us because we offered something the established players couldn't: personalized attention and cutting-edge analysis at a price point they could afford. We delivered results that exceeded their expectations, and they referred us to 2 more clients. Meanwhile, at JKL, things were unraveling. Without access to my algorithm, which they'd come to rely on, their analysis quality suffered. Clients noticed. Questions were asked. Martin blamed the technology department. Then the data team, then the market conditions, everyone except himself. One evening, about 4 months after I left, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Derek. Elizabeth, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Do you have a minute? I was working late, reviewing a client presentation. I'm listening. This new system they've implemented to replace your algorithm is garbage, he said bluntly. The error rates are through the roof. Martin's blaming everyone but himself, and morale is in the toilet. I leaned back in my chair. That sounds challenging. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. That's one way to put it. Look, I'll cut to the chase. I want to talk about coming to work for Athena. I nearly dropped my phone. You want to work for me? No, I know, he said quickly. I was a jerk to you at JKL. I didn't give you the credit you deserved. But I'm good at what I do. And I'm dying here without proper tools. I thought about it for a moment. Send me your resume, I said finally. We'll have a formal interview process, no guarantees. That's fair, he replied, sounding relieved. And Elizabeth? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Derek passed the interview process, barely, and joined Athena the following month. He struggled initially with our collaborative culture and the expectation that he'd pull his own weight rather than delegating everything to women on the team. But to his credit, he adapted, even apologizing unprompted for his past behavior and working to become a better colleague. He wasn't the last JKL employee to reach out. Over the next several months, we hired James, who had to undergo an extended probationary period due to his history of taking credit for others' work, 2 junior analysts who'd been overlooked for advancement, and eventually, the entire data science team, who left en masse after Martin publicly berated them for failing to replicate the results of his algorithm. By our 1-year anniversary, Athena Analytics had 28 employees, a real office in a converted loft in Chelsea, and a client roster that included 3 of the banks JKL had been desperately trying to land for years. Our revenue had crossed the $3 million mark, and we'd been featured in Forbes' Startups to Watch list. The day the Morgan Stanley contract was finalized, a deal worth $1.5 million annually that JKL had been pursuing aggressively, I received a LinkedIn message from Martin. "Congratulations," it read, the digital equivalent of gritted teeth. "Impressive achievement for your little venture?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. That evening, as we celebrated the Morgan Stanley win with champagne and red Solo cups, we were still budget-conscious despite our growth, Zoe proposed a toast. "To Elizabeth," she said, raising her cup, "who showed us all that the best revenge isn't just success, it's creating a place where success is possible for everyone who's been told they don't belong." I looked around at my team, diverse in every way that mattered, united by talent and determination, and felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly overwhelmed me. This was what victory looked like. Not just proving Martin wrong, but creating something that made his narrow vision of leadership obsolete. The following week, I received an invitation to speak at the Women in Finance annual conference. The topic? Disrupting the Boys Club, How Diverse Leadership is Changing Wall Street. I accepted immediately and began preparing a presentation that would detail our journey, our approach, and the concrete benefits of building truly inclusive teams. The night before the conference, I received an unexpected email from Tyler, the young analyst who'd replaced me at JKL. "I don't know if you remember me," he wrote, "but I wanted to let you know that JKL announced a restructuring today. Martin's been demoted. The board cited failure to maintain key client relationships and inability to adapt to changing market conditions. Just thought you should know." I didn't feel the vindictive satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a quiet certainty that this was simply the market working as it should, rewarding innovation and meritocracy, punishing stagnation and prejudice. At the conference, the next day, I shared Athena's story with a packed room of women at various stages of their finance careers. I told them about Martin's dismissal of women's analytical abilities, about the patent application I'd filed as insurance, about building a company that viewed diversity as a competitive advantage rather than a compliance requirement. The finance industry has operated on the assumption that success looks a certain way, talks a certain way, and, above all, is a certain gender, I told them. But the market doesn't care about these artificial constraints. Results matter. Innovation matters. And it turns out that when you build teams that include people with different perspectives and experiences, you get better results. After my talk, a young woman approached me clutching a notebook. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "I'm the only woman on my trading desk, and sometimes I wonder if it's worth the fight." I smiled at her, remembering my own doubts during those long nights at my kitchen table, coding the algorithm that would change everything. "It is," I told her. "But make sure you're fighting for what you want, not just against what you don't, yeah." Next morning, I arrived at the office early, as usual. The sunrise painted our conference room in shades of gold and pink as I reviewed the day's agenda. We had pitches to prepare, clients to impress, and a new mentorship program to launch, one that would pair experienced analysts with promising students from underrepresented backgrounds. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "You see the news? JKL stock down 12% after losing the Fidelity account." I put my phone away without responding. JKL's problems weren't mine anymore. I had a company to run, people who counted on me, and a vision that extended far beyond proving Martin wrong. Later that day, as I walked through our office, now spanning the entire floor with plans to expand to the one above, I passed Derek's desk. He was explaining a complex market analysis to one of our newer team members, a young woman who'd joined us straight from graduate school at NYU. The approach Elizabeth pioneered with the core algorithm revolutionized how we assess market volatility, he was saying, giving full credit without hesitation. "We've built on that foundation to create something truly unique." I smiled to myself and continued to my office, where a stack of resumes awaited review and 3 client calls were scheduled. Before lunch, Through the glass walls, which, unlike at JKL, we kept transparent for a reason, I could see my team collaborating, challenging each other, building something important together. Martin had been wrong about so many things, but especially this. Success in finance in any field isn't about being a certain kind of person. It's about creating systems where talent can thrive, where ideas can evolve, and where the best thinking wins, regardless of who it comes from. I hadn't just proven that women can be analytical enough to lead. I'd shown that the question itself was fundamentally flawed, and that, more than any contract or revenue milestone, was the real victory. Updated. This journey changed me in ways I never expected. Beyond building a successful company, I found purpose in mentoring women in STEM and finance. We now have a foundation that's awarded over $300,000 in scholarships to young women pursuing financial careers. Has anyone else found that your biggest professional setback eventually led to your greatest purpose?